Hey everybody, it's Candy, aka Brown Eyed Girl 69. I'm here. I'm back to read chapter 8 of Mr. Wolf and Me, and the title of this chapter is A Stab in the Back. When I first brought Mr. Wolf home from the woods, he was really nervous for a little puppy. He would only go to sleep in dark, hidden places. If you caught him off guard, he was very ferocious, baring his little milk teeth and threatening you with a terrible baby growl. Actually, his readiness to take on any unexpected enemy was what earned him his name. While I was still making lists of names and trying to decide which one suited him best, he and Mom had their first tug of war. She didn't know he was curled up asleep under the skirt of her chair by the fireplace. She was whacking around. She was whacking around there with the hearth broom and must have poked him. He grabbed the hearth broom and hung on. Mom thought the broom was snagged on something, so she gave it a real hard tug. Out it came with that puppy hanging on like a turtle waiting for thunder. When the force of the tug shook him loose, he went flying across the room in a furry ball. But the minute he got his balance, he roared back over there and attacked that broom as if it were his deadly enemy. Mom yelled at me to come see. There he was, with legs of all 4 inches long, and that soft, wet baby nose, but he was after that broom like the Great Fang of the North. "All right, Mr. Wolf," she laughed, and laid the broom down where he could reach it. He grabbed one end of it and shook it all over the room until the rug looked like a straw bin, and he was convinced that the broom was dead. Then he laid both paws on it to guard it. Somehow no name ever sounded right after that, and Mr. Wolf he became. Right from the beginning he got to sleep in my room. Mom even put an old beach towel down in the corner behind my bed so he would have his special place. That night I lay and listened to his even breathing from the darkness in the corner. I tried not to think of what might happen Monday, when Jordan Aggers would go before the magistrate. I even hoped that whoever heard the complaint would be somebody who knew his bad reputation from before and wouldn't believe him now. I knew how lucky I was. Sheriff Cravens was such a fair man. Or right then Mr. Wolf would have been out there shivering in the wind at Nicker's farm. Monday seemed awfully close. What if we ran away, Mr. Wolf and me? Could we get far enough to be safe from Jordan Aggers? Other kids ran away. Jordan Aggers himself had done it. Hadn't Mr. Austin told me that he had taken off from home without even finishing high school? The only trouble was that running away would make Mr. Wolf look guilty when he wasn't. And then there was Mom and Dad. The wind rose and filled my room with strange night sounds. I kept imagining that I heard the howl of the wild dog pack, and it made my throat ache so that I put the pillow on top of my head instead of underneath. Mom is always talking about how hard Dad works all week, but I personally think he spends most of his time thinking up jobs for Saturday. That Saturday it was firewood. I wanted to take Mr. Wolf back into the woods where Dad had felled a tree, but Dad shook his head. We can fasten him to a tree real securely and he can enjoy the nice fresh air while we work," I coaxed. Dad shook his head. "If he tugged loose, where would you be?" he asked. "He can stay in the house and be warm. Every time you take a cart full of wood back to the bin, you can stop and go pet him." Dad and I got 5 carts of wood hauled in before Mom called us to lunch. Then Mr. Wolf and I took a long, long walk in our own woods. I sat on a stone fence for a long time and watched the way he checked the smells of the wind and listened to the secret things moving in the brush about us. You could tell how much better he was feeling by the way he perked those ears up at the smallest new sound from anywhere. The only thing bad was the raw, hairless place under his chin, where Doc Fletcher had put in all those stitches. But you couldn't even see that unless he had his head lifted up into the wind. We'd been out there quite a long time when I heard Dad calling me. Mr. Wolf didn't feel much like running, so I yelled at Dad, and we took our time getting back to the house. I saw that there were two men standing with Dad the minute we got to the edge of the backyard. It was Sheriff Cravens again, and Dad's friend, Mr. Austin, was with him. I decided it wouldn't hurt Mr. Wolf to run just that little way across the lawn. "What's up?" I asked Dad as soon as I got close. He and Sheriff Cravens both looked a little too serious to be reassuring. "Well," Sheriff Cravens began, "things have changed a little about your dog there." "Changed?" I asked. "He hasn't been out of our sight." "I believe that, Miles," he nodded. "But Mr. Austin here?" The sheriff's voice stopped. Mr. Austin here looked like a kid with his fist in the jam jar. He was sweating in spite of the coolness of the day, and he changed his weight from one foot to another as Sheriff Cravens spoke his name. "I'm sorry, Miles," Mr. Austin blurted out. "I really fought with myself about this and decided that I had to do what I had to do." "What are you talking about?" I asked, half scared at seeing a grown-up man sweat like that. "Well, you know how talk gets around in this town." It was like an appeal, and when I nodded, he went on. "I was up at Leo Minister all day yesterday and didn't hear about what you and Jordan Aggers were into over your dog. But you know my wife Millie works over at the library, and she heard all about it more than once. It was Millie who reminded me how I'd come home Thursday night still trembling from thinking that I'd almost hit a dog out of the north end of town. I had described the whole thing to her, how I was driving along, and this big dog seemed to appear out of nowhere, with his skin hanging and his jowls all covered with blood, and the wildest kind of look in his eyes. I even mentioned to her that although I was sure I was wrong, the dog I caught out there in my headlights looked exactly like your Mr. Wolf." He stopped and just stared at me. "I fretted it all night, Miles. I've never had more than just reports of mischief on you, but I remember that Aggers kid as a real terror. But right is right. I'm sorry, but I felt it was my duty to tell the sheriff here about seeing your dog all bloodied out there near the Aggers place." "It was Mr. Wolf," I told him quickly. "I was right up there on the slope behind him, trying to get through that barbed wire fence. I even yelled at the car, hoping whoever it was would give us a ride back to town." "Way out there, Miles?" Sheriff Cravens asked mildly. "I asked Austin here to show me on the township map where he saw the dog. He pointed to a spot a quarter of a mile north of the clearing we went to on Pin Hill." "It was getting dark in the woods," I protested. "I was trying to get back to the north-south road any way I could go, any way I could, so I wouldn't lose my way out there. I might have cut north without knowing it. I was only thinking of working east to connect with the road." "That makes some sense, Miles, but not quite enough. The dog had been injured, and you were making him walk maybe an extra mile or two." "Even if I took the risk of getting lost," I protested, I was beginning to get scared all over again, and mad. I always thought Mr. Austin was my friend. I knew he'd been Dad's friend ever since I could remember. Why, he and his wife came over to our house for barbecues and everything. Yet here he was going out of his way to take that stranger's side against one of his own townspeople. And even Dad, he hadn't said a single word since Mr. Wolf and I crossed that lawn. He was just looking at me and waiting. "Dad," I pleaded, "Mr. Wolf was with me. He fought the groundhog, and he was with me all the time. Anything but that is a dirty, rotten lie. It was your word against Jordan Aggers's until now, Miles," he pointed out quietly. "But can't you see that this new development changes it a little bit?" "You mean you're going to let them take Mr. Wolf out there to Nickers Farm?" Dad shook his head. "We talked that over while we were waiting for you. Sheriff Cravens has agreed that if Dr. Fletcher will put him in the kennels behind the office, that it will constitute a proper impoundment. There's a storm warning out for tonight. Someone will be at the office, and we'll all feel better about the dog." "But the money for his board," I began, thinking of how much Dad had complained about all the vet bills we had since when Mr. Wolf was a pup. for the shots and the infected tick that the doctor had to dig out. And then the time he had pushed over the beehive and had to take shots to get the swelling down from that. I can't think of anything less important to me right now than Mr. Wolf's board bill. Dad's voice sounded really tired all of a sudden. Why don't you go in and bring Mr. Wolf's blanket out here so he'll feel more at home in that strange place? I wish I'd run away that last night when I thought about it, I told him. I wish I'd taken Mr. Wolf and run away before you decided to believe that Jordan Aggers instead of me. You all just don't even care that he's going to have him killed. Dad broke in quietly. Go get the rug, Miles, he said flatly. I went and got the rug and a handful of biscuits and a piece of rawhide that Mr. Wolf liked to chew on. I wasn't going to break down in front of them. They could all turn against me. Dad, Sheriff Cravens, and that big-mouthed Mr. Austin. But I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of letting them see me cry. But that ache that comes in the back of my throat and makes my eyes water came anyway, so I kept my face away from them all. I stroked Mr. Wolf just a minute down the long glossy length of his back and patted him on the rump. He looked up at me and smiled the way with his tongue out at the side. Take care, fellow, I said, and turned around and went back into the house so I wouldn't have to see them take him away. Everything went crazy from that minute on. It was like I was boiling inside, and there wasn't even anybody I could yell at. I can always depend on Mom to stand right up to me and give me as good as I put out. It's a kind of a game we've worked out over the years. I insult her and she insults me, and the one with the best line wins. We never have any of that sloppy stuff you see between some kids and their moms. So what did Mom do when I needed her the very most? You guessed it. She turned sweet and gentle on me. Every time I caught her eyes, they looked soft and moist like ripe fruit that had been stepped on. I couldn't stand it. I went upstairs and closed the door to my room. Later, I heard the phone ring, but I didn't pay any attention. When Dad called me, I yelled down that I didn't want to talk to anyone. Would you believe he just called back up to me and said, "Take your call on the phone in our bedroom." I sat there a few minutes before I could make myself pick up the phone. It was Matt Turpin, and his voice sounded strange and sort of embarrassed. "I heard about your dog," he said. "That's rotten." "Sure," I said. "You're still going out with us tonight, aren't you?" he asked. "Out where?" I asked. "Fry that," he said disgustedly. "Out for trick-or-treat. What else? On Halloween." Halloween? How could I have forgotten it was Halloween? I felt like an old man who loses track of whole hunks of time from soft places in the head. "I'm checking out," I told him. "Try me some other year." "Hey, come on, Miles," he coaxed. "We have some new ideas that you won't believe this year." I heard some whispering behind him and the boys shushing the other guys. "We got one idea that you'll really dig, but I'm afraid to tell it over the phone." "Not this time," I said. "Have fun anyway," and I hung up. Then I realized that I hadn't heard that click that comes when they hang up the downstairs phone. So maybe the way things were going, I could expect even my own dad and Mom to spy on me. It was maybe an hour later that Dad came to my door and rapped. I answered, and he stood there a minute. I never did ask him to come in, but he did anyway. "Are you going out with your friends tonight?" he asked. I shook my head. "You must have heard me tell them on the phone." He flushed. "Thanks, Miles," he said dryly. Then he made a visible effort to look brighter. "Mom and I thought if you weren't going out, the three of us could go over to the inn in Concord and have dinner." I shook my head. "You go on. I'm not hungry." "None of us are hungry, Miles," he pointed out, "so we'll all go out and not eat dinner together. That will at least take some of the weight off your mom, if it doesn't do anything else." That's the kind of thing he says when he wants me to feel worse, but it didn't work that time. Right then I was sure that there wasn't any way in the world I could possibly feel worse. Ever.